Welcome back to the Proverbs series, guys. Last video we looked at Proverbs 3, 5 through 6, probably the most popular verse in the entire book. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. Right from the ESV. And so again, amazing chapter, amazing verse in particular. But now I really want to look at Proverbs 3 verses 13 to 14 now, which says, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding, for the gain from her," it's referring to wisdom when it says her, by the way, "is better than gain from silver and her profit better than gold." I don't know if you guys are into like investing in like economics and stuff like that. This year, whew, man, those precious metals, man, they had really high value. And so that was that relevant to say? I don't know. I think it was. Yeah, I mean, gosh, just like if from straight value, we kind of get what that verse is implying. But let's actually talk about it, right? And so by the time we reach verses 13 to 14, though, in chapter 3, Solomon has actually already laid substantial groundwork because he has told us where wisdom comes from, which is God, what it requires, trust and acknowledgement, and what it protects us from, the wicked, the treacherous, and the strange woman, right? So now, and by the way, when he says strange woman, he's just talking to just it's like a colloquial term. He's not actually referring to like one singular Jezebel type of woman, right? But anyways, he now pauses the instructional mode and does something different. He breaks into praise, because this part of Proverbs 3 is actually essentially a poem about the value of wisdom, and verses 13 and 14 are basically its opening lines. And so the tone shifts from command to celebration. He's not telling us what to do here. He's telling us what we have when we do it. He's holding wisdom up to the light and saying, look at this, look at what this actually is. And the specific comparison he reaches for is money. And we'll get into that later, but let's talk about this opening part right here. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom. And so the opening word, which is in Hebrew, ashrei, translates as blessed. It's the same word that opens Psalm 1 actually, and each of the Beatitudes in the Greek equivalent, right? And so it is not primarily a religious blessing in the ceremonial sense. It's actually closer to the idea of deep, settled flourishing. You know, some scholars even translate it to as happy, but even that undersells it. It is the condition of a person whose life is going right at the deepest level, not circumstantially right, but fundamentally right. The word is plural in its Hebrew form, though, which carries a sense of fullness. It's not a single blessing, but a richness of blessing. The person who finds wisdom does not receive one good thing only. They receive a quality of life that is all around better. And the verb finds, matzah, again in Hebrew, is interesting because it implies both searching and discovering. We find what we're looking for. And if you know, this connects directly back to Proverbs 2:4, where the image is like searching for wisdom, or the image of searching for wisdom is like hidden treasure, right? And so the blessing described here in 3:13 is the arrival at the end of that search. The one who finds is the one who was genuinely looking. And then we have understanding, right? Which appears again alongside wisdom, the same word from Proverbs 2:6, which we looked at a few videos back, right? It's the capacity to discern, to see beneath surfaces, to perceive what is actually happening in a situation. It's pairing with wisdom here reinforces that Solomon is describing a complete cognitive and moral package, not just the skill to live well, but the perceptiveness to navigate the specifics of real situations. Again, guys, earlier in this video, in the intro, I talked about the economics, right? But here we're going to talk about the economics of wisdom specifically, because verses 13 and 14 introduce what is essentially an economic argument for wisdom, and it is worth taking the economic framing seriously rather than rushing past it to get to the spiritual application, right? So Solomon says the gain from wisdom is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. The words he chooses are deliberately commercial, okay? Because hear me out, right? Gain, sachar, is a trading term. It refers to the, in Hebrew, right? It refers to the proceeds of a merchant's business, the return on commercial activity. It is the word we would use in a marketplace transaction, right? And so Solomon is saying that if we evaluated wisdom the way a merchant evaluates a business deal, it would come out on top every time. And then profit, which is tevua in the Greek, refers to yield or produce, like the harvest yield from a field. It is the term for what we actually take home after the work is done. So again, a concrete economic image. The framing is significant here, though, because Solomon is not dismissing wealth. He's not saying money is bad or that financial gain is unworthy of pursuit, but rather he's making a comparative argument. Silver is good, gold is better, but wisdom is better than gold. So the logic assumes that the value of the financial terms in order to make a point about how much higher wisdom sits above them. Why is wisdom worth more than gold, though? Right, because this is the question the verse poses but does not fully answer in these two lines alone, because the answer unfolds across verses 15 through 18 later on in this chapter, in chapter 3, but the logic is worth constructing here. You know, first, wisdom produces what gold cannot buy. All right, Proverbs 3, 16-17 continues the poem by saying, "The wisdom offers long life in her right hand, riches and honor in her left, and that her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. These are outcomes that wealth can approximate but not actually deliver. Money can buy comfort but not peace. It can buy status but not honor in the deepest sense. It can extend life through healthcare but cannot give meaning. Wisdom produces the substance that money can only simulate." Ecclesiastes, which is also written by Solomon, it's another book in the Old Testament, is essentially a long case study in this point, right? Solomon had more wealth than any person of his freaking era, right? And his conclusion after exhausting every material pleasure was, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." He said that in chapter 1. So the man who wrote Proverbs 3:14 also wrote Ecclesiastes 2:11, by the way. "Then I considered that all my hands had done, and the toil I'd experienced in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind." So he's not even theorizing, right? Because he ran the experiment, which took place over the course of his whole life. Secondly, wisdom is not subject to the same risks as wealth. In Proverbs 23:5, later in the book, it observes, "When your eyes light on it, it is gone, for suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle towards heaven." Wealth is volatile, markets collapse, businesses fail, circumstances change. We know that. Matthew 6:19-20 in the New Testament makes the same point, though. "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven." Wisdom, once genuinely acquired, does not evaporate. It is not subject to inflation or market conditions. It compounds always rather than depreciates. And then third, wisdom aligns us with the source of everything. This is the deepest reason. So let's just put everything down and really listen here, because Proverbs 3:19-20, a few verses later, follows immediately. "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open, and the clouds drop down the dew." So wisdom, we see here, is not just a useful skill set. It is the principle by which God organized reality itself. And when we acquire wisdom, we are not just getting better at life. We are literally aligning ourselves with the structural logic of creation. we are thinking and living in harmony with how things actually are in its tangible existence. So no amount of gold can buy that, right? And then we got to go to the biblical precedent, though, right? Solomon himself. Because let's not act like this guy was a bum. There's almost like an ironic dimension to Solomon writing these verses that deserves total acknowledgement. In 1 Kings 3, it's in the Old Testament as well, God appears to Solomon in a dream and offers him everything he wants. Anything and everything he wants. Solomon's response is one of the most remarkable moments in the Old Testament. He doesn't ask for wealth, long life, or victory over his enemies. He asks for wisdom. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern this, your great people? That's what he said. All right, and God's response to him was telling. Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I have done according to your word. I will also give you what you have not even asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you for all of your days. That was in 1 Kings chapter 3 as well. So look, Solomon chose wisdom over wealth and received both. That is not a formula to manipulate God with. It is a demonstration of the principle behind Proverbs 3:13-14. So when we genuinely prioritize wisdom above financial gain, I genuinely believe this is telling us that we position ourselves for a kind of flourishing that includes but transcends material prosperity. Lastly, wisdom and wealth are not enemies. They're not mutually exclusive. One important clarification before moving to the application part here, guys, is that Proverbs 3:13-14 is not making an argument against financial diligence, career ambition, or the legitimate pursuit of economic stability, because those are all normal, right? But look, the Bible does not treat wealth as inherently corrupting or poverty as inherently virtuous. But the book itself, Proverbs, is full of practical financial wisdom. It's all throughout the book. What verses 13-14 are arguing here is about ordering and priority, not opposition. The question is not whether we pursue financial stability. The question is what we pursue it with, and whether we are pursuing something more important before it. A person who acquires wealth through wisdom, integrity, and diligence is living exactly what Proverbs actually endorses. A person who pursues wealth at the expense of wisdom, though, is making a trade that does not hold up under scrutiny. And so Paul captures this nuance perfectly in 1 Timothy 6:10, where he says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. Not money itself, the love of it, the disordered prioritization of it. That is what corrupts us. Wisdom keeps money in its proper place as a tool rather than a master." So let's just move on to these practical applications here, right? Because again, the biggest concern in the Christian life is how do we get practical? How do we get practical with it? Right? Because it's one thing to know what the Bible is trying to insinuate. It's another to actually live by it and put our best foot forward in trying to live by it. Okay? And so the first thing is to audit what we are actually treating as the most valuable. Right? This is the honest question that this verse forces. Not what we say we value, but what our actual decisions reveal about our priorities. Where does our time go when we have a choice? What do you think about most? What do we sacrifice other things for? All those questions. And I'm actually listening to those rhetorical questions, and I'm just realizing, man, I am terrible at this. I am gosh awful at this. I gotta lock in. But anyways, most people would verbally agree that wisdom matters more than money. Sure, right? But far fewer people live that way. The gap between stated values and actual behavior is important. Second, invest in wisdom with the same intentionality we invest in finances, right? If we track our budget, plan our savings, and think strategically about financial growth, apply that same intentionality to our pursuit of wisdom then. Because we got to read scripture consistently. We got to seek out people wiser than us and spend time with them. We got to pursue correction instead of avoiding it. We got to reflect on our decisions and what they taught us. Wisdom compounds the same way that interest does, but only if we are actively investing and depositing into it, right? And the third application here, right, is to reframe how we evaluate a good decision. Most people, I can't speak for all, I can't speak for others, but I would imagine most people evaluate decisions primarily by their financial or material outcome. Did it pay off? Did it yield results? Proverbs 3:13-14 here suggests a better primary metric. Did this decision reflect wisdom? A decision can produce short-term financial gain while being fundamentally unwise, cutting corners, sacrificing relationships, or building on an unsustainable foundation. And a decision can look financially suboptimal while being exactly the right one. So when we start evaluating our choices by their wisdom rather than just their immediate yield is when we know we're growing in Christ.